Today we have a very special guest with us, Tania, who is from Dunedin in New Zealand. She is a professor of sports coaching in the School of Physical Education, Sport and Exercise Sciences at the University of Otago. Tell us about your background in sports. Did you play any sports or love towards any particular sports, or how did you get into sport?
Yeah, well, I suppose I grew up in the 1960s, which might have seemed a long time ago to many of your viewers, but it was quite a lot simpler in those days because we didn't have formalized sport when somebody's turning 4. The kids just played in the street, and you probably didn't start playing club sport until you were maybe 9 or 10. And then I grew up in a small town of, say, 9,000 people, so you could roam a lot. And as long as you were home before dark, you came home from school, you dropped your bag, and then you went off and did things. And our closest big city, which I know won't be big in India's terms, was about 100,000 people. So if we went over the hill to the big city, that's where we had to play our formalized sport. So it wasn't a big deal, really. My father was into sport. He played cricket and played rugby. So every Saturday afternoon, whether at the winter or summer, we would always be dragged around the sports grounds following him. And he was very adamant that his children would play sport. I was the firstborn, and out of 4 girls, I was the only one that was interested in sport. The others still are involved in recreation, like Pilates and swimming and biking, but they're not sporty people. So for me, growing up in that environment where I had some freedom to play and play sport, but my parents were quite conservative. So for me, sport was my freedom. I was able to go and play sport and meet people and travel, and whereas I wasn't allowed to go partying like my friends. So sport was so I think it was, as I said, it was simpler in terms of you just played, and played turned into sport. So I suppose what sports I played, I started off playing tennis and hockey, and then basketball, and those were sort of my teenage years. And then in my 20s, I fell in love with rowing. And well, I still loved the other sports, but I was in small rural areas that didn't have tennis clubs and didn't have a basketball club. So I could row and I could play hockey. So I played hockey at representative level, but because I never trained, I was probably a bit lazy. I never trained. I never got further than representative level at the provincial level. I never got to national level. So I played hockey until I was 24, and then I went overseas and I didn't play hockey until I came back to New Zealand. And like somebody asked me to play when I was 42. They said, "You used to be a winger. We need a winger." So I came back, and then 18 years later, I'm still playing hockey. So I'm actually playing more hockey as I'm older than I did when I was younger, which seems strange.
That's your love, I think. That's your love.
Yeah. So now I'm training. Now that I'm in the national team, I am now training.
So, Tania, what according to you are 2 positive and 2 negative points in sports?
Well, I think for me, I've sort of just touched on it then, I think for me, sport gives me freedom, gave me freedom to move my body in a whole range of ways that maybe in the 60s, the girls were supposed to behave in particular ways. In playing sport, I could move my body, I could run, I could jump, I could do a whole range of things. And it also gave me freedom socially. As I said, I came from quite a conservative background, and I could go on sports trips, and I had that freedom. So I think sport gives you freedom. And I think it also enables you to meet new people that have got some commonality, that i.e. their sport. But it also enabled me to travel internally within New Zealand, and more recently internationally. And so it does highlight potentially that sport does offer the opportunities to break down barriers, religious barriers, cultural barriers, sort of social barriers. I've played hockey in Argentina and in South Africa and the UK, Germany. And the commonality between all those people is their sport, even though we might not have commonalities in other things. So I think those are the two things in terms of meeting new people, the opportunities to break those barriers, and the freedom.
And so what are the negative things which you thought about? These are the positives one.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the negatives, my two negatives are sort of connected, and that's primarily associated with the professionalization of sport coming down into the junior spaces. Like we've had the professional model, and increasingly parents are wanting to have their children specialize early because they think that's the pathway to professional sport. And, I think going back to my childhood, the first question wasn't to a parent is what is your child doing? It's, whereas now the children have to do ballet or they have to do swimming and they have to do football or whatever it is. And so there's so much more pressure on parents and then on kids to actually become, do all their fundamental motor skills. Whereas if you just let them play, you develop those fundamental motor skills. So I think that's one negative in the current climate is there's greater formalization of junior sport. And associated with that is the cost of sport. Increasingly, it's in New Zealand anyway, it's becoming prohibitive for some families to play sport because now it's become more formalized. You have to have the right kit, shirt, your boots, stick. You have to pay registration fees. You have to have travel. So I think lots of families now, if they've got more than one or two children, it's expensive. So I think a lot of children are being cut out of playing sport because of the cost. So they're my two negatives associated with maybe the sporting culture as opposed to sport per se.
Very well kept. Yesterday I was having a discussion with one of the parents group, and the kids are of 7 years of age, 7, 8 years of age, but they are targeting that how they should become more serious and how should perform, and competitions are coming and all those things. And a lot of stress are coming to the parents as well as it is getting diverted towards the kids. And these are the kids we have seen, they do not pursue sports for a longer period of a time because with a lot of stress at the early stage, then competing at the later stage becomes very less. So enjoyment, fun, happiness is something it's not discussed. So I was asking them one question: do you see an athlete first or a child? Or do you see a child first or an athlete? So that was very important because if you see an athlete and you work only on athlete and then on child, it becomes very difficult. You need to have the child first and then the athlete.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we've lost that sometimes when we're looking at sport. They're kids. Let them play. Let them have fun, and that the rest will come. But if they don't have fun and they drop out, you don't have the rest.
Correct. So, Tania, today's discussion is all about talent identification in sports. And one of the question rises is, what is the difference between when it is said a child is gifted or talented in sports?
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to use here I'm going to read a little bit to make sure I've got it right. The work of Gagne, who talks about the difference between giftedness and talent. And so he talks about the use of, this is giftedness, right? The use of natural abilities and aptitudes in one of the 4 domains, whether it be intellectual, creative, socio-affective, or sensory motor, that enables the individual to be ranked top 10 of their peers, top 10% of their peers. Now, I think sometimes we can very flippantly say, oh, they're gifted, and they might be gifted within their village or their town, but that's not the top 10% of their peers, nationally. So I think we use that word gifted quite loosely. So it's in terms of how do they use their natural abilities and aptitudes that enables them to be in the top 10% of their peers. So that's giftedness. Talent, in contrast, is the mastery of competencies or abilities systematically developed to a level that results in the individual being ranked in the top 10% of their peers. So again, that's recognizing that development and the active development, not just because you were born 6 foot, not that you were born 6'7", but you were, those things you can't control. And some other researchers went on to say that talent is the interaction between natural abilities, the developmental processes of learning and practicing, and chance, interpersonal, and environmental factors. So I think when we're talking about talent, there's a lot more in that package than giftedness. And I think in many ways, if we're thinking about talent, there's recognition of the challenges, but also the opportunities. So I think that's where most of us aren't gifted. Most of us aren't gifted in the sense that we're in the top 10% of our peers. And so we all probably can recognize somebody who at primary school was the fastest kid in the school. Now, did that fastest kid in the school ever go to the Olympics? They might have been gifted, but they might not have ever learned to work hard or overcome obstacles or develop resilience, or they might have found a passion somewhere else. You know, the fact that they could run fast might not have been of interest to them. They might have enjoyed doing something else. So just because you can be gifted doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to progress.
In the same line, I was in a discussion with Dr. Joseph Baker from Canada.
Yeah.
And he was also specializing the same thing, that talent is not important, is the process which is more important. Like if you are giving more importance to the process and workings, that gives you more chances of achieving your goals rather than the talent dependency.
And also I think it provides the opportunities for young people who are developing not to have all their eggs in one basket. So if they get injured, the skill set that you develop as opposed in the process of becoming talented can be transferred across to business or across to other parts of your life. Okay. So that your decision making, your problem solving, your resilience, your teamwork, all those things, your leadership, all those things that you develop as a consequence of becoming talented aren't wasted. They can be transferred.
So, Tania, why is talent difficult to predict?
Well, I think there's quite a few reasons. And one of them, I think, is because talent isn't very widely understood. I think there's that sense of what is talent, and maybe you're assuming you've got it or you haven't got it. So I think one of the reasons why it's hard to predict is we don't actually know what we're doing. Second one is, I think, as I said before, talent is a combination of genetic, physiological, psychomotor, chance, interpersonal, and environmental factors. So that's quite complex. So if we are only assessing on, say, the physiological factors, then we're going to miss a whole range of other factors when it comes to talent, developing talent. So we think, okay, they're fast, but we're not looking at the environment and they're working in, or whether their their family haven't got the financial resources to support their talent. So I think that's another reason we only tend to assess the physiological. I think another reason is that often talent is assessed before puberty. And so therefore it's very hard to predict what is going to happen in that phase. And also there's a lot of unstable periods during puberty. So either they do grow, they don't grow. They can become disillusioned if they were quite good, and in the process of puberty they lose their motor competencies because their levers have got longer, or they become clumsy, and therefore they don't have that resilience, and therefore they drop out.